Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. Is it possible to make the HOA that hates you pay your property taxes for life? It sounds impossible, but I found a legal loophole that turned years of harassment into a monthly paycheck. They tried to destroy my native prairie. Now they're funding it. You have to hear how this happened. I bought my property 15 years ago, long before the surrounding area became desirable. 3 acres of what was essentially an overgrown field on the edge of town. The previous owner had let it go wild, and most people saw it as an eyesore. I saw it as potential. I'm a botanist by training, though I work in environmental consulting now. When I bought the property, I had a vision of restoring it to native prairie meadow. I spent years researching which grasses and wildflowers were indigenous to our region. I collected seeds, started germination projects in my garage, and slowly began the process of turning that overgrown mess into something that actually belonged there. It wasn't just about aesthetics. Native meadows support pollinators, prevent erosion, and require almost no maintenance once established. No mowing, no watering, no fertilizers. Just let it do what it's supposed to do. By year 5, I had monarch butterflies. By year 7, I had nesting grassland birds that hadn't been seen in the area for decades. The local university's biology department even asked if they could use my property for field studies. I built a small house on one corner of the lot set back from the road. Nothing fancy, just enough space for me and my dog. The rest of the 3 acres was dedicated to the Meadow project. I installed walking paths using reclaimed brick. I built a small pond that filled naturally with rainwater. I put up nesting boxes for bluebirds and kestrels. This was my life's work, essentially. My retirement plan was to just sit on my porch and watch it thrive. Then, about 4 years ago, the development started. A construction company bought the 50 acres adjacent to my property. They broke ground on a planned community called Riverside Estates, which was ironic because there was no river within 3 miles. 75 houses, all cookie-cutter suburban boxes with identical beige siding and postage stamp lawns. They built a community center, a playground, and a decorative entrance with a fountain that I could hear running from my porch at night. I didn't mind the development itself. Progress happens, but I did mind what came with it. A homeowners association. I wasn't part of the HOA. My property predated their development by over a decade. I had my own deed, my own taxes, and absolutely no interest in their covenants, conditions, or restrictions. But that didn't stop them from trying. It started small. A welcome packet showed up in my mailbox with information about the HOA, as if I'd just moved in. I ignored it. Then came a letter asking me to attend a meeting about community standards. I threw it away. Then the visits started. That's when I met her, the HOA president. Let's just say she had that very specific energy of someone who peaked in high school and never got over it. She showed up at my door on a Saturday morning with a binder, a clipboard, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hi there, I'm Patricia, the HOA president for Riverside Estates. I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood and talk about some exciting opportunities for you to get involved in our community. I pointed out that I wasn't part of her community. I'd owned this land for over a decade before her development existed. She kept smiling. Well, technically, while you're not within our platted subdivision, we consider all adjacent properties to be part of the greater Riverside Estates area. We'd love for you to consider joining voluntarily. The benefits include access to our community center, our monthly social events, and of course, the peace of mind that comes with maintaining property values. I declined politely. She left me a packet anyway. 2 weeks later, I received a formal letter from the HOA stating that my overgrown yard was negatively impacting property values and requesting that I maintain appropriate lawn care standards. The letter included a list of approved lawn care companies and a deadline for compliance. I wrote back explaining that my property was a registered native prairie restoration project, that it was providing ecological benefits to the entire area, and that I would not be mowing it. I included citations from 3 different ecological journals and a letter of support from the university's biology department. Patricia showed up at my door again, this time without the smile. Look, I understand you have some kind of environmental hobby, but this is a community. People moved here for a certain aesthetic. Your property looks like you've just abandoned it. We need you to work with us here. I told her that her community didn't get to dictate what I did with my property. She left angry. The harassment escalated over the next 3 years. I received letters threatening legal action for various invented violations. Patricia would drive by slowly and take photos of my property. She filed complaints with the county about alleged code violations, which would trigger inspections that always found nothing wrong. She sent certified letters demanding I trim my trees that were supposedly blocking sightlines for her community members, even though my property had exactly 4 trees and none of them were near any roads. The county got tired of her complaints. After the 5th false report, a code enforcement officer actually apologized to me and mentioned they were considering charging her for frivolous complaints. That just made her angrier. But I dealt with it. I documented everything, kept copies of all correspondence, and mostly just ignored her. My Meadow was thriving. I had my peace. Her tantrum wasn't worth my energy. Then came the event that changed everything. The HOA decided to host a Community Appreciation Day at their community center. This wasn't unusual. They did events a few times a year. What was unusual was what I came home to one Tuesday evening in late spring. I came home from work to find orange traffic cones placed throughout my meadow, creating lanes like a makeshift parking lot. And there were cars, at least 15 cars parked in my meadow, crushing the native grasses and wildflowers I'd spent years cultivating. Tire tracks cut through patches of prairie dropseed and butterfly milkweed. One car was parked directly over a section where I'd been nurturing a rare species of wild lupine. I was shaking with anger. I could see people through the trees at the community center, laughing and having their party, completely oblivious to or uncaring about the fact that they were destroying my property. I immediately called the police non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said they'd send an officer when one became available. I waited for 45 minutes, getting more furious by the minute as I watched people at the event through the trees completely oblivious to the fact they were trespassing. When the officer finally arrived, he walked the property with me. I showed him the tire tracks, the damaged plants, and explained that I'd never given anyone permission to use my land as parking. He took photos and documentation. The officer went into the community center. I waited by my property, arms crossed, preparing for the confrontation. A few minutes later, Patricia came storming out with the officer trailing behind her. "This is absolutely ridiculous. We're having a community event and we needed overflow parking. You're being completely unreasonable about this." The officer interrupted her. "Ma'am, this is private property. The owner has not given permission for parking. These vehicles are trespassing. But we're neighbors. This is what communities do. They help each other out." I finally spoke up. "I'm not part of your community. I've told you this for years. You don't get to use my property without permission." The officer confirmed that yes, these were trespassing vehicles, and yes, I had every right to have them towed. Patricia's face went red. "You can't do that. These are families having a nice time. You'd really ruin their day over some grass?" I looked at her. "Some grass? This is a native prairie restoration that I've spent over a decade building. These cars are destroying endangered plant species. Yes, I'm having them towed." The officer asked if I wanted to proceed with towing. I said yes. He went back to his car and started making calls. Patricia tried to negotiate. "Look, just give me 10 minutes to make an announcement. Everyone will move their cars. There's no need to involve tow trucks and make this a bigger issue than it needs to be." The officer interjected. "The property owner has requested the vehicles be towed. That's his right." The first tow truck arrived within 20 minutes, then another, then 3 more. I'd called every towing company in the area and told them I had multiple vehicles trespassing on my property and needed immediate service. They were happy to help. People started streaming out of the community center when they heard the commotion. Several cars were already hooked up and being lifted. The reactions were priceless. People were screaming, running toward their cars, trying to argue with the tow truck drivers who just shrugged and kept working. One guy tried to jump in his car while it was being hooked up. The police officer had to physically restrain him and threaten him with arrest. Multiple people were on their phones, presumably calling the HOA president to fix this disaster she'd created. Patricia was screaming at me. "You're going to pay for this! This is harassment! I'll sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress. You've ruined our community event." I just stood there and watched. The officer warned her to calm down or she'd be removed from my property as well. In total, 17 cars got towed before everyone else managed to move theirs. Each person who got towed would have to pay the towing fee plus impound fees to get their cars back. I later found out that cost them each between $300 and $500 depending on how long it took them to retrieve their vehicles. After everyone cleared out, I walked my property and documented the damage. The tire tracks had destroyed approximately 1/8 of an acre of established meadow. Plants that had taken years to establish were crushed or torn up. The soil was compacted in multiple areas, which would affect drainage and future growth. I took over 200 photos from every angle. I sent the HOA a bill for $8,000 in damages. This included the cost of restoration materials, professional consultation fees from a restoration ecologist, and compensation for the loss of rare plant specimens that would take years to replace. I included every receipt, every calculation, and a detailed report from the university professor who oversaw research on my property. The HOA responded with a letter from their attorney claiming I was being unreasonable and that the damage was minimal disturbance to an unmaintained field. They offered me $500 to resolve this matter amicably. I consulted with an attorney who specialized in property law. He looked over everything and smiled. "They really screwed up," he said. "This is clear-cut trespassing and property damage. The documentation you have is excellent. We can absolutely pursue this." My attorney sent a formal demand letter. The HOA's attorney sent back a dismissive response. So we filed a lawsuit for the property damage and included documentation of all the harassment I'd endured over the previous 3 years. We also filed formal complaints with both the county and the state HOA Oversight Board about Patricia's pattern of harassment. The lawsuit took 9 months to get to trial. 9 months of back and forth, depositions, document requests, and mounting legal fees. My attorney was working on contingency for the main claim, but I still had to cover filing fees and expert witness costs out of pocket. It was stressful and expensive, but I was determined to see it through. During the discovery process, something interesting came to light. The HOA had never actually voted on or approved the community appreciation event. Patricia had organized it on her own and told people it was an official HOA event. She'd also authorized the use of my property as overflow parking without consulting anyone on the board, or, obviously, me. More damning, we discovered she'd been telling HOA members that she had a verbal agreement with me for parking usage during events. This was a complete fabrication. Several HOA members provided depositions stating that Patricia had specifically told them it was fine to park in the Meadow because the owner had agreed to it. This was fraud. Not just annoying HOA nonsense, but actual civil fraud that could open them up to serious liability. We also reported it to the district attorney's office to see if they wanted to pursue criminal charges, though my attorney warned me that criminal prosecution for this type of fraud was unlikely. The HOA board panicked when they realized what Patricia had done. She'd exposed them to significant liability through her unauthorized actions. They tried to settle. We refused. This was going to trial. The trial itself was almost anticlimactic. I had documentation for everything. Photos, letters, witness statements, expert testimony about the ecological value and restoration costs. The HOA's defense was essentially that the damage wasn't that significant and I was being vindictive. The judge didn't see it that way. He awarded me the full $8,000 for the initial damage, plus attorney fees, plus additional damages for the ongoing harassment. The HOA was ordered to pay just over $60,000 total. Patricia was quietly removed as HOA president 2 weeks after the judgment. I heard from several HOA members who reached out to me afterward about what happened. Apparently, there was an emergency board meeting where she was given the option to resign or be formally removed and potentially sued by the HOA for her unauthorized actions. She resigned. You'd think that would be the end of it. But 2 weeks after the judgment, while the HOA was preparing to pay, they held another community event. I was out of town for a work trip when my neighbor called me. Apparently, the interim HOA leadership had set up cones in my meadow again and were directing people to park there. I was 3 hours away, sitting in a hotel room when I got that call. But I had the number for every tow company in the area saved in my phone from last time I started calling. I explained the situation to each one, confirmed I was the property owner with documentation ready, and told them I wanted every single vehicle towed immediately. I explained I'd already won a lawsuit over this exact issue just weeks before. 4 different tow companies showed up. It was like a coordinated strike. My neighbor sent me videos of the whole thing. Cars getting hooked up left and right. The interim HOA president standing there helplessly, probably realizing their insurance rates were about to skyrocket. Some people were crying, others were screaming. The tow truck drivers just kept working. They'd verified property ownership with me over the phone and had copies of my deed. They knew they were completely in the right. 23 cars got towed that day. 23 separate families had to pay towing and impound fees. The total cost to HOA members was probably somewhere north of $10,000. When I got back to town 2 days later, I found my meadow absolutely destroyed again. More damage than the first time. Deeper tire ruts. More plants destroyed. They'd apparently used my property for parking for the entire duration of their event. not just overflow. I documented everything again and sent another bill to the HOA for damages, this time for $12,000. I also sent them a cease and desist letter making it crystal clear that any future use of my property would result in immediate legal action and criminal trespassing charges. That's when I got a nasty certified letter from Patricia, even though she was no longer HOA president. The letter stated that since I'd chosen to be adversarial to the community, I shouldn't expect any community courtesies in the future. She specifically mentioned that they would no longer be maintaining the drainage easement that ran through my property. Wait, what drainage easement? I pulled out my property survey indeed. Sure enough, there was an old drainage easement from the 1970s that allowed stormwater from the street to flow through a culvert under my property. The thing was, this easement was from when the street was first built, decades before the HOA existed. And more importantly, the easement required the municipality to maintain it, not the HOA. The HOA had no authority over it whatsoever. But Patricia's letter gave me an idea. I researched the easement thoroughly. It was indeed a municipal easement established in 1973. The city was responsible for maintenance. However, nowhere in the easement did it say I couldn't modify my property as long as I didn't directly block the culvert itself. I called the city's public works department and asked about the easement. They confirmed it existed but admitted they hadn't actually inspected it in years. I asked what would happen if natural settling or erosion changed the drainage patterns on my property. They said that was just part of normal environmental changes, and as long as I wasn't deliberately sabotaging the system, it wasn't my problem. Perfect. I hired a contractor who specialized in land management. I explained what I wanted to do. We walked my property and identified exactly where the drainage culvert entered and exited my land. Then we got to work. We didn't touch the culvert itself. That would have been illegal. But we did add substantial amounts of fill dirt and clay around the entrance to the culvert on my property. We built up the surrounding terrain to naturally divert surface water away from the culvert entrance. We created berms and swales that directed water to different parts of my property, where it could soak into the ground and benefit the Meadow ecosystem. The contractor brought in heavy equipment to place the fill properly. It took 4 days and cost me nearly $8,000, but it was worth every penny. The county inspector came out to verify we weren't violating any codes. Everything was completely legal. I made sure to send a copy of the final inspection report to the HOA, just so they knew everything was done by the book. The next major rainstorm hit about 2 weeks later. I was watching from my porch with a cup of coffee. The results were spectacular. Water that had previously drained through the culvert under my property was now being diverted. Without that drainage path, the stormwater had nowhere to go except to pool in the streets of Riverside Estates. The development had been designed with the assumption that my culvert would handle their excess runoff. Without it, their infrastructure was completely inadequate. Within an hour of heavy rain, the main street of their development was flooded with 4 inches of standing water. The decorative fountain at their entrance was overflowing. Water was pooling in yards and creeping toward house foundations. I could hear the chaos from my porch. Emergency calls went out to residents to move their cars to higher ground. The community center parking lot became a lake. Several residents reported water in their basements. The HOA emergency called the city's public works department, who sent someone out the next day after the rain stopped. The inspector walked the area, checked the culvert on my property, and wrote up a report. His conclusion was that natural settling and landscape changes had altered drainage patterns, which sometimes happens. He noted that the culvert itself was still functional, but that surface water was no longer reaching it efficiently due to terrain changes. His recommendation was that the HOA needed to install additional drainage infrastructure within their own development to handle their stormwater, as they'd been relying on an external drainage path that was never guaranteed to remain unchanged. In other words, the city confirmed that I'd done nothing wrong, and the HOA's drainage problem was their own responsibility to fix. The HOA's engineering assessment came back with a price tag of $170,000 to install proper drainage infrastructure throughout their development. This would require tearing up streets, installing new culverts and catch basins, and completely redesigning their stormwater management system. I received a desperate letter from the HOA board asking if we could negotiate a resolution to the drainage issue. They offered to grant me an honorary HOA membership with no fees. I declined. They came back with an offer to pay for the restoration of the drainage patterns on my property. I declined again. Finally, they asked what it would take for me to restore the previous drainage flow. I told them I'd be willing to consider modifying my property to restore some drainage capacity, but only if they granted me a formal drainage easement on my terms, paid me a monthly easement fee, and signed a binding agreement that they would never use my property for parking, never contact me about property maintenance, and would formally apologize for the years of harassment. I proposed an easement fee of $1,200 per month. That would cover my annual property taxes of about $13,000 with a little extra for ongoing Meadow maintenance. They countered with $600. We settled on $900 per month, adjusted annually for inflation. The contract was airtight. I had my attorney draft every word. The HOA would pay me $900 per month for the right to have stormwater drainage cross my property. The agreement included a clause that any violation of the terms, including any attempt to use my property for parking or any harassment from HOA leadership, would result in immediate termination of the easement and forfeiture of all payments made. The HOA board signed it. They didn't have much choice. The alternative was spending $170,000 on infrastructure upgrades, plus the ongoing costs of dealing with flooding every time it rained. I had my contractor come back out. We modified the berms and restored some of the natural drainage flow, enough to prevent the catastrophic flooding in their streets, but I made sure the work was done in a way that I could easily reverse if they ever violated our agreement. That was 2 years ago. I've received $900 per month like clockwork ever since. That's nearly $22,000 so far, and it'll keep coming as long as the HOA exists. My meadow has recovered from the damage. The tire tracks are gone, replaced by new growth. The rare lupines came back stronger than before. I've added more native species and expanded the walking paths. The university still uses my property for research. I sit on my porch most evenings and watch the fireflies come out. The HOA recently sent me an invitation to their summer community appreciation event. I declined. But I did notice they've added a substantial number of parking spaces to their community center lot. Apparently, they learned their lesson about using other people's property without permission. Patricia moved away about a year ago. I heard she joined the board of her new HOA. I almost feel sorry for her neighbors. Almost. As for me, I'm getting paid every month to maintain the peaceful, beautiful property I built, while the HOA that spent years trying to force me into compliance now depends on my cooperation for their basic infrastructure to function. And if they ever step out of line, I can shut down their drainage system with a few days of work and watch their streets flood. Some people might call it petty. I call it justice. And it's absolutely delicious. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This happened in the early 2010s, before the advancement of technology in video editing and content creation. I was hired as a content creator for a university that wanted to leverage YouTube to kickstart their branding campaign. The pay was low, roughly $2,200 USD, and in those days there were not that many video content creators around, and the process usually took a long time from start to finish. I was hired, and on my second day, my manager presented my KPI of 85 3-10-minute videos in 52 weeks, which was impossible for a one-man team in those days. This meant I had to do the scripting, producing, casting talents, shooting videos, composing music — they were too cheap to pay for a royalty-free music subscription — and editing. All of which I had to use my own equipment and software because their cameras and computers were so old, they simply couldn't handle the strain of even doing things in 720p, much less 1080p. I tried to let my manager know, but she just smiled encouragingly, telling me to give it a try, assuring me if the videos were good, the quantity would not be what she focused on. Hearing this, I agreed to give it a try. My manager treated me well in the first month, however. One day when she found out I was a smoker, her attitude changed overnight. A colleague had actually done a facepalm when I told her about it, and she let me know that the manager hated smokers and often advocated to get them fired. She started nitpicking me on everything, from smelling like cigarette smoke after my breaks, coming in 5-10 minutes late despite doing more than 4 hours of overtime daily, not being contactable during break times. The list goes on. But I soldiered on, because I just wanted to do the work and do it well. 5 months in, I was called into the director's office where I saw my manager putting on her best, displeased but gleeful face, and I felt my stomach drop. The director told me that she was disappointed because she had heard that I was falling behind on my work, and it was already halfway through the year and I had only completed 30 out of my 85 videos. I tried to explain that I had been working my butt off on these videos. I literally worked 6 days out of the week, over 60 hours, just to do what needed to be done, and that being a one-man army made things impossible. And also the fact that the videos I had put up grossed the highest views ever on their YouTube page. I also recounted how my manager said that she was looking for quality videos over quantity. The director dismissed this and stated that the KPI was simply 85 videos in a year, and since it was almost half a year in with my numbers at less than half, she felt it prudent to cut the cord early. I asked how would they even meet the KPI if they were to fire me. Now my manager had snorted, saying, "We'll find a professional production house to finish your work." The director had given her an odd look but nodded in her support nonetheless, telling me, "You don't need to worry, manager will get the job done." That was when a light bulb went off in my head. Seeing as I was the content professional in the office, one of my jobs was to keep a database of production houses to use in the event we needed to do a shoot that required more resources, and I was sure that they would be using the production houses in my database as my manager had no contacts in the production industry. So, I changed the contact numbers and messed up all the emails on all of the entries except one. The one, I had a friend working as a junior director, not an assistant director, but a director assigned to smaller video projects. I gave him a call and told him of my plan, and sure enough, within 2 days, they were called to come in to pitch. I told him that I had a plan that was a win-win for us. It would instantly help him and put him on the fast track to a director position by bringing in that much business to his production house, and it would also benefit me financially. I would teach him exactly how to pitch to win over the boss and the director, and in turn his company would pay me a standard finder's fee of 15%. He agreed instantly and immediately put me on the line with his general manager, who upon realizing this was to be 6 months of work for a high 6-digit payout, instantly agreed and drew up a contract. As it turns out, after I gave them a metaphorical step-by-step playbook, they were the perfect fit, somehow understanding the needs and style of the university as well as the sort of themes the university wanted to feature. The director and my former boss were amazed that my friend's production house was so familiar with their content that they signed them up on the spot. Now, even back then, using a production house back then was not cheap. Each video that they produced could cost double to triple my monthly salary, given that they had specialized people for each function. Producer, director, director of photography, gaffer, sound person, video editor, assistant director, production assistants, etc. But this meant that they could complete a video every 2 to 3 days. So yes, they produced 50 videos in a span of 4 months for over 100 months of my salary, and I sat back and collected the healthy 15%, which was about 15 months of my salary. This allowed me to put money aside for a holiday and the rest to further my studies with a respected film school overseas. I thought my plan ended here and I had gotten back at my former bosses, but to my surprise I received a call from my colleague while I was holidaying in Bali one day. This was the same colleague who had facepalmed when I told her that my manager had found out that I was a smoker. She told me that my former manager had been fired and my director given a massive blasting by the chancellor of the university. The content creation project which I was hired for was only given a budget equating to about 1.5 years of my salary, and they had exceeded that budget by over 10 times. My former manager was so desperate to ensure that her content creation project could be completed that she had thrown caution to the wind, paying anything to get the job done so that she could show my director that she had completed the project, and had approved the massive spend without getting consent from the director. So that is how I got my friend a super fast promotion to a full director in his production house, and a year of pay after getting unfairly fired from my job. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I'm a qualified dispensing optician in France. Qualified dispensing opticians here are trained in physiological optics and visual analysis. We can adapt a prescription when necessary, but we are not allowed to create one from scratch. Back when I was learning the trade, a colleague of mine had a perfect malicious compliance moment with a customer. At the time, a medical prescription wasn't legally required to buy glasses. This customer had seen 3 different ophthalmologists, received 3 different prescriptions, and decided to cherry-pick the parts he liked from each one to build his own improved prescription. The worst part was the addition in his progressive lenses. For those unfamiliar, the addition is the extra magnifying power used for reading and near vision in the lower part of the lens. In almost all cases, the addition is identical in both eyes. Significant differences are extremely rare and usually tied to specific medical conditions. This customer was not one of those cases. Instead, he wanted one eye focused for about 67 centimeters, 26 inches, and the other for about 40 centimeters, 16 inches. Think of walking with a stiletto heel on one foot and a flat shoe on the other. Unless your body is built for it, you're going to have a bad time. My colleague explained repeatedly that this was a terrible idea. The customer replied, "I'm a professional photographer. I know optics. Just do what I tell you." My colleague warned him that our satisfaction guarantee would not apply, strongly advised against it as part of his professional duty, and had him sign a document acknowledging all of it. Remember, he was a licensed optician, not just a salesperson giving an opinion. The customer doubled down. "It'll work. I know what I'm doing." So my colleague did exactly what he asked. The lenses arrived, a high-end pair of progressive lenses costing about $750, $850. He put them on. "This is incredibly uncomfortable. I can't see properly." "Yes, but that's not normal." "Actually, it is." "So what are we going to do?" "We? Nothing." Silence. In the end, we were kind enough to offer a discount on a replacement pair made with a sensible prescription. We could technically have used one of our manufacturer adaptation allowances and replaced the lenses at no cost. But those exist for genuine adaptation issues, prescription errors, dispensing errors, or unusual medical circumstances. This was none of those. The lenses were made exactly as ordered and performed exactly as everyone except the customer expected them to. Anyway, thank you for watching.